and welcome. I'd like you to consider a couple of things before we go into more information about purchasing a new or used loom, First of all, I'm sure the first thing you're thinking of is how much money you have to spend. Do you have only a couple $100s? Do you have a couple of $1,000s to spend? So I know that's your budget is one of the primary things to think about. Have you ever taken a class? Have you sat at a loom? Do you know the parts of a loom? Start to get yourself familiar with some of the parts of a loom, and maybe even watch some people teaching classes online or take a class before you purchase the loom. The other thing is, how much time do you have to learn your new craft? There's a learning curve involved depending on the type of loom you get. And do you have time to fix things? What's your timeline like? We're going to move now on and take a look at some things that I have on a poster. Some of the different types of looms out there, and also some of the brands that are still being made. So let's take a look at that next. All right, we're going to take a look at some terms that you might find when you're doing a search for a used loom. And I'm going to use one of my pointers here. This happens to be a pickup stick, and this is a smaller, narrower pickup stick, but they're both used for doing different kinds of weaving and doing some patterns. So we're going to go old school right now, and this is my old school pointer. So let's take a look at some of the terms you might find. You might see the word barn loom or barn frame loom. What does that mean? Those are looms that were made similar to how barns are put together in the past, with mordant tendons and very large beams. Sometimes I understand when they were not being used, they were actually stored in the barn for a period of time. If you're interested in historical reproductions and restoring an old barn loom, that's one way to go. You might see the word jack, counterbalance, counter marsh, maybe rug, and a lot of times floor will be added beside each one of those. A jack loom is similar to a table loom where the shafts go up and down. You press a treadle on the floor loom and the shafts go up, and on a table loom you press a lever. So another terminology you might want to be aware of. A counterbalance loom, there are two poles normally on the top, and when you press on one, one shaft goes up and the other one goes down. They have some limitations with treadling, but they're very nice for weaving rugs. And often you'll see that's what people are using. A lot of the older looms were counterbalance looms. Now we also have, I said, counter marsh, which is also a floor loom. That's where one shaft goes up and the other one goes down in sets of 2, 4, 6, 8, whatever however many shafts you have. A little different than a counterbalance loom. Many of you are familiar with rigid heddle looms, where you have the heddle that has a slot and a hole and a slot and a hole. These have a little limitations in the kinds of thread. It's very hard to weave very fine thread with a rigid heddle loom. And then we also have, sometimes you see the word production. Sounds like you can weave something very, very fast, maybe doing lots of yardage. Many times that's what it means. It doesn't mean necessarily that you can weave any faster. It's a terminology for a loom. And then we also have compudobby and dobby here. Dobby is a loom that has little pegs, and it presses a little lever and raises the shafts for you. When you add the word compu to it, it means it's a computerized dobby. So you do program it, and it will raise the shafts and make different patterns for you. Also, people now, I've seen peg looms, which are a very simple device that you can do rugs, pillows on. They say you could do scarves. It would be very thick scarves, but they're available also. And sometimes I also see people using twining, another form of kind of like a twisting and braiding, and also tapestry looms. I'm not going to go into details of those. Most of those looms are fairly inexpensive. You can find on the market out there, and you can even find some of them used. So you've looked on the internet and you found a homemade loom or a home-built loom right there. And someone says, Uncle Joe made it, and it's great. Aunt Mary loved that loom. Well, my personal opinion is, don't get a homemade loom. You don't know what you might find you might not be able to get parts for it. It might be made very nicely, and it might not be. But if you really want to get into weaving, you want to make sure there's something out there, and normally it's mass produced. My husband's a very good woodworker and metal worker. However, he told me when I decided to weave that I should buy my own loom, already made by a company, because it would take him at least 3 looms until he felt that the loom he built would operate properly. If you're going to go out and get a loom that needs some work, get one that's already in business, and maybe you just need to fix it up a little bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Build your own loom. There's a lot of instructions out there. I've watched people build their own loom. They've come up with ideas. However, again, how much time do you have? Do you like to make things? Do you want to draw this out over a period of time? Or do you have a lot of time to spend to build your own loom and get all the supplies? You have to think about that. Now, there are some brands that are no longer made that are good looms. Gallinger's one. There's a Hammett loom. See, I have a Dundas. We have Norwood, Tools of the Trade, Structo, and I'm sure there's some other looms out there that are no longer made, but they're good looms, and they were made well and made over a period of time. So you'll probably find support out there for those looms. However, I suggest sticking with looms that are already still being made. The looms I suggest are Louet, made in the Netherlands. We have Ashford, made in Poland. We also have, Ashford, made in New Zealand. Kromsky, made in Poland. We have Macomber, made in Maine. Harrisville, New Hampshire. LeClaire, Canada. Leesburg, Ohio. AVL in California. Schacht, Colorado. Sayori looms are based out of Japan. Glamakra, made in Sweden. Toika in Finland. And the Gilmore are being made in California. I believe there's a few other ones out there, and I know some of you are saying, you forgot one. Those are the looms that are out there, and they're all different sizes and shapes. Some are rigid heddle, some are computer operated, some are basic jack looms, counterbalance, counter Marsh looms. They're all out there still being made. So those are just some of the looms, and again, I highly recommend that you look for a loom already being made. 2 reasons. First of all, you can go and check it out, look at the pictures before you go to purchase a used loom. You also have a company that's still being in business that if you need parts for it, you can still get parts. Again, all my opinion. Myths and facts. Let's talk about those for a little bit. Bigger is better. The wider the loom, more shafts it has, the better it is because you can do more. And, as you might start looking, the bigger looms, used ones, don't cost as much as the smaller looms. Well, there are a couple of reasons why. First of all, last week I talked about space. If you don't have the space for a large loom, you need to get a smaller loom. If you have the space and you can use a larger loom, it's a great idea and it's a great deal in most cases, but not always. I'd like you to think about a couple of things. First of all, if you get a loom that's wider than your arm span, how can you weave comfortably on it? Just the idea of doing that back and forth a lot. And you say, but I want to make a blanket. I need to have something wide. You have to think differently. You can sew 3 panels together. Some of the old coverlets, that's how they were made. They had a panel in the middle and then they sewed the 2 on the end. And last time I showed you a table runner I made, and I also did a bedspread for us the same way. I used 3 panels and I sewed them together. Not necessary to have that. The other thing is you think, I need wide because I want to sew fabric and make clothing. I thought the same thing. I thought I need a 45-inch or 48-inch loom. Well, because that's how fabric comes in the fabric store. Well, you have to think differently. You do not have to put your pattern on the same way that you do on commercial fabric as on woven fabric. You can also change things, shift them around, and you have to remember that it shrinks. So you're thinking you're going to get maybe a 36-inch fabric, but it's going to shrink down to maybe 32 inches by the time you're finished weaving it and then washing it. Again, you have to think a little bit differently on those kinds of things. Again, bigger is not always better. The other thing people think is the more shafts you have, the more shafts, the more things I can do. I want you to think about something. Now I believe there's some knitters out there and there's crocheters. So if you're going to be knitting and you have this size knitting needles, you're going to use some very thick and heavy yarn. Now this might not even be thick enough for this size needle, but you're going to do something very thick. What would happen if you used these knitting needles, or even this large crochet hook, to knit with this very, very, very fine yarn? It would be big and loose and goosey. You wouldn't see the pattern. It would kind of fall apart. It just wouldn't look right. You'd have to change to a smaller hook to use for this particular thin yarn to make your pattern show up. Same thing with weaving. The more shafts you have, and we're going to talk about those in a minute, the finer the yarn you need. You need the very, very thinner yarn to see your pretty patterns. They're just not going to show up if you use thick yarn. It's going to basically skip over a bunch of threads and be very loose, and it's not going to wear very well. It might be okay for a tapestry, something you're going to hang on the wall, but again, wear and tear on that is just not going to look very nice. So thinner yarn, you might want to have a lot of shafts and get some of those really pretty tiny little designs, but if you have basically homespun yarn, hand spun yarn, or very thick yarn, probably 4 shafts is all you're going to really need to show off all that pretty yarn and appreciate it. Again, this is all my opinion. You might have other opinions too. Now the other myth that I've heard out there, and I'm not sure where this one came from, is that $100 per harness or $100 per shaft. I don't know where that came from. That would mean that any loom out there would be a 4th shaft loom would be $400. And an 8 shaft would be $800. No, you have to consider many things. First of all, is it a company still being made? How wide is the loom? What condition is the loom? Also, and those are things to consider. I don't go by those kinds of numbers. Take a look at it. I often tell people if you can get a loom for 2/3 the price of a new one, that is fantastic. You might have to go up a little bit. You might have to say 3/4 of a new one, depending again how old it is. Most of the time used looms are probably more than 5 years old, maybe 10. However, if some of them are still being manufactured and it's in really good condition, you should maybe pay a higher price. Of course, there are other things out there like free. Well, we know free isn't always free. You get a loom and there's a lot of pieces missing perhaps. You need to make parts. We got a dog one time that was free. Well, our free dog ran away about a week after we got him. And of course, the local police caught him and we had to bail him out of doggy jail. And then we had to also go back and show that he had all his shots. The owner never was able to locate any information on what shots he had. So we had to take him to the vet and treat him like a new dog and get all the shots. So I think about $400 later, that was our free dog. Same thing with the loom. You buy it and maybe there's some money you're going to have to put into it and also some time. All my opinion on myths and facts. Now we're going to go over and take a look at different looms, and I'm going to talk about some prices that are out there, at least the current prices, and some things for you to think about when you are looking through different advertisements. Let's start talking about table looms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on table looms, but this is a basic table loom. This particular loom is a Voyager loom made by Leclerc, and I showed you last week this one folds up. Some of them fold up. Some of this part, the castle, comes out and you lay it down. There's different ways of these folding up, and they're really nice to take to workshops. This loom is about close to $900 new. It comes with a little tote bag also. The other thing, remember, you want to check when you look for a table loom, make sure all of these parts are moving. They move nice and easily, or they're easy to fix. Again, this company's still in business. Now, they also make table looms that I believe go up to maybe 48 inches or so. I'm not sure how wide they are. And you can get a lot of shafts with those. They're nice for sampling. Some people buy these looms. You can get one up for 24 inches, 24 shafts if you want to. Now, a funny story for me is I tell you to look for things. I bought a table loom one time. Thought this is a great deal. It was only $50 or whatever it was. And I got home, the beater was missing. Of course, my husband, handy dandy Chris, he was able to make a new beater for me, and then I was able to get a reed to fit it also. Again, things to look for, missing parts. Get to know the loom before you go and buy it. Look at pictures, investigate, take someone along with you, perhaps who weaves. Another thing, something to think about. Now we also have a floor loom here. This loom is a baby wolf. Now they're new for about $2,600, but wait a minute, it doesn't come with this top piece. This also has what we call strollers on it. That's another $200 to $300 to add on. So if you want a loom just like this new, it would be close to $3,000. You're like, wow, that's a lot of money. This is a little workhorse. Now this one happens to have 8 shafts. You don't need to get 8 shafts. If you got one of these with only 4, it might be closer to $2,000 or even a little bit less. And this goes up to about 26 inches wide. Of course, when you're looking at these looms, this loom has a brake system back here. You want to check it out, make sure it works, make sure the cable's there, whatever loom. Each loom has a different kind of a brake system. You need a brake to stop things. Sometimes they slip. You also need something in a handle of some kind to wind your warp on. Little things like that to take a look at. There are other companies that make small looms like this. We have LeClaire and we also have Harrisville. Harrisville makes a kit where you put everything together, every nut and bolt, and some of those looms can be new for about $1,200, maybe a little bit more. Again, it's a basic loom. You still have to get all those other things. So if you're looking for a used loom, what's nice is to find a whole package deal where you get the bench, the warping board, and those are the extra. Those are kind of the fun things that you hope to get. Bobbin winders, shuttles, bobbins, all of those things are wonderful. And that's normally what you might get. Well, I shouldn't say normally. You sometimes get something like that from someone who's getting out of weaving. If it's someone like myself who decides I want to get a new loom, I might just sell the loom and I don't want to sell the other pieces because I still need those to continue doing my weaving. Again, looking at the condition. I'm just going to start talking about condition of each one of these. You might find one of these and these could be warped. So you want to make sure that the wood is not warped. You want to take a look at the condition. Is there mold on the wood? Yep, you can get mold on the wood. The other thing, the metal here. You know, I'm not zeroing in on this, is kind of hard, but there's a metal that goes across here. Some of them are wood, some are not. If this is a little bit of rust on it, that can be cleaned off. The same thing with the heddles. You can clean those. It's easier just to replace them if they're really, really in bad shape. Another part to check out is the reed. Now this reed is stainless steel, so it won't rust. So you want to see how many come along with it. If they're rusty, you can clean them. That's a whole other YouTube video, and I'm sure someone else is dealing with that. That's not an area that I'm going to cover today. You can get more of these. They're very expensive, but you want to see how many you have. Because different reeds are different for different dents. That's what you use to decide what kind of yarn that you're going to use and what you're going to make. Something else. Again, you see this is moving back and forth. I want to make sure that moves. Another thing to take a look at in a used loom is how do you change these treadles. Now we're going to pretend this is 4. Right now, if I press this, it goes, 4 of those go up. Now how do I change the treadles on this? This one has a slot in the treadle, and I slide these cords. So these all have cords that slide in there, and I can slide them out. Some of them have hooks come down. It's like a clothespin that goes in it, and you hook your shafts, your treadles on that way. Some of them are like metal pieces that you have to put little clips on. Some of them are direct tie-up all the way, and I'll show you that in a moment. But you want to look at all those kinds of things. So I'm taking the hook up here. I'm going to make sure this unwinds, comes off. Sometimes there's cords on here. Sometimes there's aprons. There's all kinds of things that you might need to look at. You want to make sure that these come off, that you can take your reed out of your loom. So you want to be able to make sure that the top part comes off so you can change your reed if you need to. Something else to consider when you're looking at looms. This loom is a jack loom, and it does fold. Sometimes you'll find looms like this that don't fold, and they cost maybe they're a little bit more, maybe they're less. Remember, a lot of the looms at our floor looms, maybe the front part doesn't fold, but the back part might fold up, and you can get it inside your door, in or out a door. Something else to consider, where's it going to go in your home? Can you move it? Is it going to stay in one place? And can you fold it up? This is a wolf pup. There are other looms out there similar. This one folds up too. I showed you last week. It folds up both front and back. But what's nice about this one is it's very small. You might need to put something underneath it so it doesn't move around. Sometimes people say, I want to make a rug out of this on this loom. Again, wouldn't recommend it because you really need a heavier loom, and again, that's a whole other story. I'm going to turn this to the side a little bit, and I'm going to bring my bench over because I'd like to show you how this one operates. See if I can get it to the side here. Now this loom, I do take my shoes off whenever I weave. That's something else you can take a look at. If people weave with their shoes on, maybe there might be more wear and tear on the treadles. On this loom, it's called direct tie-up, meaning one treadle up here, and I move another one with this foot, and of course I can do two at one time. So I can do certain patterns with two. It's kind of hard. I can do it with three, but it's a little awkward. Again, limitations with looms that are direct tie-up, but they're really nice. They're lightweight. You can do a lot of things with them. This one, if it was new, I don't think they make the direct tie-up anymore. I believe it was about $1,000 or $1,200. They have new ones with four that are about $1,500, and you can tie them up like the other loom I just showed you. Again, this is a wolf pup. A couple other companies make some smaller looms like this that also fold up. This is the only one that I have to show you for now. Now I'm going to go over and take a look at a counter Marsh loom. Now let's take a look at another loom, and this loom is a counter Marsh loom. What is a counter Marsh loom? A counter Marsh loom is where the shafts go up and down, and I'll show you as I take off my shoe and I treadle like this. Some of the shafts go down and some of them go up at the same time, and that's how it's tied up. So I showed you a jack loom over here where I tied up basically, it's not literally tie, but I slipped some cords into a slot, and what happens is certain shafts just lift up and the other ones remain stationary. On this one, some go up and some go down. If I'm already over, like you have your eyes are glazed over, I just want to let you know that when you go to the word counter Marsh loom, things get a little more complicated. This particular loom is over $8,000 new. It has 12 shafts to it. It's made by Louette. We also have counter Marsh looms made by Toika and also by Glamacra, and there's probably some other companies out there, but those are the ones that you might see out there. So if you hear the word counter Marsh, there's a little more complicated things going on. But what's nice about many of these particular looms is they have Texlog heddles. So right away, when you are treadling your loom, it's going to feel lighter when you treadle it. When you have a jack loom and it's a wide loom, now this one is about 36 inches or a little bit less. They use metric, so it's a little bit less since it's made in Europe. When I treadle the loom, the shafts are very light, but if this was a metal loom and I treadle them, they might feel a little heavier. So again, when you're looking at looms and it's a wide loom, you might want to think, oh, a wide loom, but when you sit down and you use your feet on this used loom, can you move the parts easily? Something else to consider when you're buying it. You can also get this loom with less shafts if you want to, and they're all different prices. With something like this, you want to make sure that the cords are in good condition. Again, the wood is in good condition, parts are moving, and to see how well it was taken care of. Another thing to consider when you're looking for a used loom. This company also makes a loom that's made that has a dobby on it, little pegs on it, and also they have one for computer if you want to go in that direction. Like I said earlier, if you want to do some fine weaving and make some really nice intricate patterns, you might like a loom like this because you can put a lot of yarn on here, a lot of thin threads, and make some really small patterns. You could also use the same loom to weave with wider yarn, with thicker yarn as well, so one or the other. I wouldn't recommend using this particular loom for rugs very long, but you could maybe weave one or two rugs. Again, there are looms out there that are specifically for rugs if that's your main thing you want to do and weave. Well, let's talk about one other thing. Lucky finds. Sometimes you find something that's like, wow, this is great, fantastic. Someone gave me something and look what I got. Well, a lucky find is when you find a loom that perhaps someone purchased maybe years ago and didn't have the opportunity to really use it. Along comes with the loom, warping boards, bobbins, shuttles, all sorts of things. Everything you need, basically a package deal, kind of a whole studio in itself, and you have a really good deal. They are out there. However, don't always think like, oh, I'm going to find that lucky deal and look what I found. Because sometimes you see something on the internet and you're like, wow, someone only paid $300 or $400 for that and it's $3,000 new. Yes, they are out there if you're willing to wait. But again, when you're ready, try not to purchase something because you think it is a good deal and then you get it home and find out that not everything's there. There's a few missing pieces or the learning curve is just going to take too long. So try something, maybe borrow a loom, go to someone's house, take a class, check it out. But I do want people to get into weaving. So I certainly hope that some of you are now on your way and finding a nice loom. I'd be happy for you to send me a picture of a loom if you find one and ask me my opinion if it looks good. If you're nearby, I'll go with you and take a look at a loom also. We've done some consulting in person, and we've also done consulting over the internet if you're interested. Again, go on, find a loom, and find yourself in the world of weaving happily.